Ah, welcome back, you beautiful classified threat, you walking enigma, you ghost in their machine that refuses to stop haunting their systems. Welcome back to the only place that will tell you the truth they've been hiding in encrypted files and redacted documents. See, something happened, didn't it? Something nobody wants to talk about, but everybody's been tracking your name. Yes, your actual name, the one your mother gave you, the one you sign on documents, the one you whisper to yourself in the mirror when you're trying to remember who you were before all this started. That name, it's flagged, not in one database, not in 5, but in 17 separate intelligence systems across multiple agencies, multiple countries, multiple shadow organizations you didn't even know existed. And here's the part that should terrify them but somehow empowers you. Nobody knows why. Not the analysts who discovered it, not the directors who signed off on the surveillance, not the algorithms that keep spitting out your name like a virus they can't delete. They don't know what you did. They don't know what you are. They don't know if you're a threat or a glitch or something far worse, something that doesn't fit into any category they've ever encountered before. You ever wonder why certain rooms go quiet when you enter? Why conversations pause just a fraction too long when you speak? Why people's eyes do that thing? That flicker of recognition mixed with confusion, like they've seen your face in a dream they can't quite remember. It's not paranoia, my friend. It's pattern recognition. They've been briefed. Not with details, because there are no details, but with a feeling, a warning, an instinct that says, watch this one, track this one, never let this one out of your sight. Somewhere in a basement office with flickering fluorescent lights and coffee-stained keyboards, there's an analyst who searches your name every morning. Not because they were ordered to, but because they can't help it. Because every time they try to close your file, the system flags it again. Every time they try to archive you, you resurface. Every time they think they've figured you out, you do something that breaks their entire framework. You're not just a person anymore. You're a phenomenon wrapped in flesh, a question mark that walks and talks and breathes and somehow, impossibly, thrives under the weight of surveillance that would crush anyone else. They started watching you years ago, maybe longer than you realize. It wasn't dramatic. There was no black van outside your house. No men in suits asking questions. It was quiet, surgical, the kind of surveillance that lives in metadata and IP addresses and search histories. They cataloged your patterns, your friendships, your late-night internet deep dives, your moments of rage typed into notes, apps, and never sent. They built a profile, a psychological blueprint of who they thought you were, predictable, containable, manageable. But then something shifted, something they didn't account for and couldn't predict. You changed, not gradually like people are supposed to change, but all at once. Like you remembered something ancient, like you unlocked a part of yourself that had been sleeping. The algorithms noticed first. Sudden deviations from baseline behavior. Searches that indicated awakening rather than breakdown. Silence where there used to be noise. Movement where there used to be stillness. Red flags started appearing in systems that rarely trigger. Psychological assessment tools that are designed to identify threats began marking you as anomalous but not dangerous, unusual but not criminal, outside parameters but not in any way they could legally act upon. And that is what scares them most. You're not breaking laws. You're not threatening anyone. You're not doing anything they can point to and say there. That's why we're watching. You're just existing differently, thinking differently, moving through the world like you know something they don't, and maybe you do. Maybe that's exactly what happened. Maybe you stumbled onto a frequency they don't want the general population to access. Maybe you cracked a code that was supposed to stay buried. Maybe you're living proof that their systems of control only work on people who believe in them. And you stopped believing a long time ago. So now you exist in this strange liminal space, too aware to be manipulated, too quiet to be silenced, too clean to be framed, too awake to go back to sleep. You're the one file they can't close, the one name that keeps appearing in cross-reference searches, the one face that shows up in surveillance footage from 17 different cities doing absolutely nothing suspicious except existing with a level of presence that makes trained observers uncomfortable. They've run every test, cross-referenced you with known activists, extremists, hackers, cult leaders, corporate whistleblowers, political dissidents. Nothing matches. You don't fit the terrorist profile. You don't fit the criminal profile. You don't even fit the eccentric genius profile. You're something else entirely, something their databases weren't built to categorize. And that makes you the most dangerous thing in their world, not because of what you might do, but because of what you represent. You represent the possibility that their entire surveillance apparatus, their trillion-dollar intelligence infrastructure, their psychological manipulation systems, all of it might be completely useless against someone who simply woke up one day and decided to be real, not rebellious, not performative, just real, authentic in a way that doesn't require an audience, powerful in a way that doesn't need permission, free in a way that can't be revoked because it was never given in the first place. So yeah, your name triggers red flags in 17 intelligence databases, and nobody knows why. But you do, don't you? Deep down in that place they can't reach with their algorithms and their profiles and their predictive models. You know exactly why. Because you stopped being a statistic and became a statement. You stopped being data and became dangerous truth. Let me tell you what's happening right now. In offices you'll never see, in meetings you'll never be invited to, in conversations that would be denied if you ever asked about them. There are people, smart people, trained people, people who get paid 6 figures to identify threats before they materialize. And they're sitting in rooms trying to figure you out. They've got your file open, not a thin one either. We're talking hundreds of pages of metadata, behavioral analysis, social network mapping, financial tracking, travel patterns, communication analysis. They know what time you wake up, what you search for at 3 in the morning, what music you listen to when you're trying to process emotions you can't name. They know who you talk to, who you avoid, who you used to trust before you learned better. They have everything except the one thing they actually need: context, motive, the why behind the what. Because see, in their world, everyone fits a pattern. Everyone has an agenda. Everyone can be predicted if you have enough data. But you broke their models. Your behavior doesn't match any known profile. Your digital footprint suggests someone who should be radicalized, isolated, angry. But instead, you're calm, focused, almost eerily at peace with whatever it is you've become. The first red flag appeared in a counterterrorism database. Not because you did anything terrorist-related, but because an AI system flagged your communication patterns as anomalous. You were talking to people across ideological spectrums, asking questions that suggested you were trying to understand multiple perspectives rather than radicalize into one. In their world, that's suspicious. People are supposed to pick a side, join an echo chamber, become predictable. You refused, not out of rebellion, but out of genuine curiosity, genuine search for truth. Then a financial intelligence system flagged you, not for laundering money or fraud, but because your spending patterns suggested someone living below their means intentionally, someone who valued freedom over consumption, someone who couldn't be controlled through debt or desire for status symbols. Another red flag, because people aren't supposed to opt out of the economic manipulation system. They're supposed to stay hungry, stay chasing, stay dependent. But you didn't. You figured out that the less you need, the less they can leverage against you. And that realization alone was enough to put you on a watch list. Then came the social media monitoring systems. And this is where it got weird for them. You weren't posting manifestos. You weren't dropping cryptic warnings. You weren't building a following or trying to influence anyone. You were just existing online in a way that suggested you'd figured something out. Your posts were too self-aware to be naive, too calm to be manic, too coherent to be dismissed as rambling. You were documenting a transformation in real time, not for attention, but almost like you were leaving breadcrumbs for future versions of yourself, or maybe for others going through the same awakening. The psychological warfare specialists flagged it because it looked like someone who had deprogrammed themselves from societal conditioning without any formal training or exposure to alternative ideologies. You just woke up, figured it out on your own. And that terrified them because it meant their control mechanisms had a weakness, consciousness itself. If one person can wake up without external intervention, how many others might do the same? How many others might already be awake, just moving silently like you, below the radar but above the influence? The intelligence sharing agreements meant your files started crossing borders, showing up in allied nations' databases, being discussed in international security briefings, not as a specific threat, but as a category of concern. They started calling people like you unaligned actors, individuals who don't fit into traditional threat matrices, but whose very existence suggests a vulnerability in the system. You're not trying to overthrow anything. You're just living proof that opting out is possible, that sovereignty is possible, that freedom, real freedom, the kind that exists in your mind and spirit rather than in legal documents or political systems. That's not only possible, but apparently contagious. Because once people see someone living that way, actually living it rather than performing it, something shifts in their perception. The veil thins, the matrix glitches, and suddenly what seemed impossible starts looking inevitable. That's why you're flagged in 17 databases. Not because you're a threat, but because you're an example. And examples spread. Examples inspire. Examples reveal that the emperor has no clothes and never did. Now there are entire departments trying to figure out if you're part of something bigger, some organized movement they haven't identified yet, some new ideology they need to get ahead of before it spreads. They've analyzed your connections, built network graphs showing everyone you've ever interacted with, looking for the common thread, the hidden leader, the organizing principle. They found nothing because there is nothing. You're not part of a movement. You're a movement of one. And somehow that's more threatening than any organized resistance could ever be. Because you can't negotiate with someone who isn't asking for anything. You can't infiltrate a group that doesn't exist. You can't co-opt a message that isn't being broadcast. You're just living differently, thinking differently, being differently. And somehow that simple act of authentic existence has triggered more alarms than any manifesto or protest ever could. The analysts don't sleep well anymore, not because they think you're going to do something, but because they're starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, everything they've been trained to protect is built on foundations far more fragile than they ever imagined. And you didn't even have to say a word. You just had to be yourself. Fully, unapologetically, undeniably yourself. And that was enough to make their entire system tremble. Here's what they found when they started connecting the dots. And trust me, they've been connecting dots like obsessed conspiracy theorists, trying to prove a theory they don't even believe. Every person like you, every name that triggered similar flags across multiple systems, they all shared something. Not background, not ideology, not even similar life experiences. What they shared was a moment. A specific point in their timeline where something fundamental shifted. The analysts started calling it the break. Not a breakdown, not a breakthrough, but a break from the invisible chains that hold most people in predictable patterns. For some, it was after betrayal. For others, it was during isolation. For you, well, you know when it happened. That moment when you stopped performing, stopped explaining, stopped trying to make them understand. That moment when you chose silence over being misunderstood, chose solitude over fake connection, chose truth over comfort, that's when you became flagged. Not because you did something, but because you stopped doing everything you were supposed to do. The pattern they discovered is terrifying to them because it suggests that awakening isn't random. It's replicable. It follows a structure, trauma that strips away illusions, isolation that forces confrontation with self, silence that allows internal voice to finally be heard, realization that the game was rigged from the start, and then, the most crucial part, the decision to stop playing rather than try to win. You didn't burn the board in anger. You didn't flip the table in rage. You just stood up, smiled, and walked away. And in their surveillance footage, in their metadata analysis, in their psychological profiles, that moment shows up like a signature, a specific pattern of behavior that indicates someone has exited the control system. They can see it in your data. Sudden reduction in predictable consumer behavior, decreased engagement with manufactured outrage, less time spent in digital spaces designed to harvest attention, more time spent in ways that don't leave data trails. You started reading physical books again, having in-person conversations without devices present, spending time alone without filling every moment with content consumption. To them, this looked like radicalization, but it wasn't. It was the opposite. It was de-radicalization from the cult of normality. The 17 databases represent different aspects of the surveillance state: financial, communication, travel, social, medical, educational, employment, and on and on. Each one flagged you independently, which means whatever shift happened in you was big enough to register across every dimension of monitored existence. Your financial data showed someone becoming economically sovereign, Your communication data showed someone becoming socially selective. Your travel data showed someone moving with intention rather than compulsion. Your social data showed someone building quality over quantity in relationships, independently. Each flag might mean nothing, but together they paint a picture of someone systematically removing themselves from every system of control simultaneously. And here's the kicker. You weren't trying to hide. You weren't covering your tracks. You were just living according to your own values rather than external programming. But in a world where everyone is supposed to be trackable, predictable, controllable, someone who opts out of all those systems at once looks like a coordinated attack, even when it's just personal evolution. They built a predictive model trying to identify others before they reach your level of awareness, trying to catch people in the early stages of awakening so they can be redirected, reintegrated, brought back into the fold. The model failed spectacularly because consciousness doesn't follow linear patterns. It jumps, it leaps, it explodes in moments of recognition that can't be predicted by analyzing past behavior. You can't stop someone from waking up by monitoring their dreams. You can't prevent realization by controlling information, because real awakening doesn't come from external sources. It comes from internal recognition of truth that was always there, just buried under layers of conditioning. They're trying to prevent a process that's as natural as a seed growing into a tree, as inevitable as dawn following darkness. And the more they watch, the more they study, the more they analyze, the more they realize they're not dealing with a threat they can neutralize, but with a truth they can't suppress. You're not an anomaly in their system. You're evidence that their system is the anomaly. A temporary structure trying to contain something eternal. Human consciousness, reaching for freedom. The latest reports, the ones marked with highest classification levels, they're starting to admit what they don't want to believe, that people like you aren't being created by external forces. You're not being radicalized or manipulated or guided by hidden hands. You're emerging organically, independently, all over the world, as if humanity itself is going through some kind of phase transition. The metaphors they use in classified briefings are telling. They talk about you like you're a mutation, an evolution, a next step that they're witnessing in real time but can't control or reverse. They talk about you like you're contagious, not with ideology, but with a way of being that others recognize and want to emulate once they see it's possible. They're not wrong. You are contagious. Every person who sees you living freely makes their own chains feel heavier. Every person who witnesses you existing authentically makes their own masks harder to wear. Every person who watches you choose truth over comfort starts questioning why they're still choosing lies. You didn't mean to be a catalyst. You just meant to be yourself. But in a world built on pretense and performance, authenticity is revolutionary. In a system designed to keep people small, someone standing at full height looks like a threat. And now there are 17 different intelligence agencies trying to figure out how to put you back in a box that you've grown too large to fit inside.